Welcome to a baptism. John the Baptist.
Are you ready to accept Christ, Freeberg, into your soul?
I honestly have no idea what I'm doing here. I have no idea who these people are or what this is or why you're all wearing white. I mean, seriously, I'm sure you're very nice people, but I have no idea what this is.
Have you seen The Wicker Man?
Jake Al was like, we're taping an episode in Napa. And I'm like, what? On a, off day? What is this?
Monday.
Today's Monday.
It's
Yeah.
Monday.
Are you okay, buddy?
Yeah.
You low blood sugar?
Yeah, actually, I do. Bring us like a cheese plate or
Can
something.
we get a
Yeah,
cheese
can we get
plate
a
for
cheese
Saks,
all day.
please?
And guacamole and chips. Please.
But honestly, like, I didn't sign up for this. I thought we just agreed to a podcast, and somehow we've been roped into doing some dog and pony show for Jake Al's LPs.
By the way,
Is that true or what?
these are a bunch of your LPs as well. You just
they
have
are?
never met them. Literally. Okay, I'll drink it. Yes, sir. Literally, somebody's like, Jake Al, I'm with this incredible endowment. We're incredibly successful. I'm like, oh, that's great. Yes, you heard I'm raising a fund. They're like, no. We heard Saks is going to be here. I'm like, yeah, you want to meet him and invest in his fund? Oh, no, we've invested in all his funds. We just never met him. And I said, wow, that's
That is
one
pretty
way
funny,
to do
actually.
it. That's how successful Saks is.
It's pretty funny.
Two things they've never seen: Saks and a distribution.
Oh, we're off to a hot start.
Great fucking decision, whoever you are. You're a real fucking genius back there.
Oh, my
Well, except for the fund we already paid back.
Oh my God. I lost control of it in the first 90 seconds. Why should tonight be any different?
Except for the 5-year-old fund that's already fully returned.
Okay.
Of course.
Well, all right. Whoa, easy. So, welcome to the Angel Summit. These are my besties. We do a podcast called All In. We thought we'd do it live. This is the 4th time we've ever appeared on stage together. The first 2 times were at Freeberg's LP conference in the Presidio. Yeah.
I resented that one too.
we know you are.
Zach's first time coming out to see humans since
Yes.
COVID. He came out in his mask. He took his gloves off. It was very uncomfortable for him, but he eased into a seat.
And then, of course, we did the All In Summit last year in Miami. And this is the 4th time. So it's great to be out here. We have a couple of news items on the docket we could start with, or we can go right to Q&A with these many audience members who have a lot of questions. What would you gentlemen like to do?
Chamath has a few words he'd like to say. Go ahead.
Whatever you guys want to do.
Chamath is drunk, by the
He's
way.
drunk.
He texted us. You can see that grin on his face. That's the Chamath grin he gives when he decided, like X Capital,
He's scheming.
that he would not have LPs and he would just invest his own money. He does not care. So the gloves are off. Let's do Q&A.
Jay Levy says, Sachs, what's the path for DeSantis to win the nomination and get the base of Trump?
Oh, red meat.
Oh, good
Starting out with
politics.
red
Here we
meat.
go.
Here we go.
I think the path basically is he has to win Iowa and or New Hampshire. It's just that simple. But keep in mind that Trump did not win Iowa in 2016. Ted Cruz did. Iowa tends to be more religious. I think DeSantis is trying to outflank Trump on the right, actually, on certain issues. And so he's on the ground there campaigning. From what I understand, he's generating a lot of interest and enthusiasm. And he's going to keep plugging away at it. I think he's going to out-hustle Trump. I'm not saying he's going to win, but I think he is going to work harder. And the path would be that over the next, 9 months, that Trump's style and message, which is admittedly much more entertaining than DeSantis, but kind of fatiguing, whether that kind of gets old and DeSantis is more like disciplined messaging. People just kind of wake up and say, you know what, like, I don't really want to go back to the chaos of the whole Trump show. This seems like better to me. So that's basically what I think has to happen is Trump fatigue has to set in and people realize that there's a different
Was that
way.
CNN town hall a sign that some group of people find him incredibly entertaining and the media themselves want him back because it's great for ratings, a la Mencken on Succession? Or is it a sign that, like, my God, that's so fucking exhausting, like you're saying, Sachs? What do you think?
I think that the base liked the town hall because it was Trump walking into the lion's den and standing up to the mainstream media, which is what they like. but I don't think it did anything to help him in the general, because I think that viewers who don't like Trump or aren't entertained by Trump, I mean, there's nothing there to really grab onto, I don't think. So, but look, I think your point about who does the media want to get the Republican nomination, definitely Trump, because he's good for ratings.
I mean, it really is that simple.
And they think they can beat him. So right now, the Biden people, the Trump people, and the media all want Trump over DeSantis. And that is why, like, DeSantis is getting just bashed by everybody right now, is because, you know, everyone's kind of aligned on this. But the minute that Trump gets the nomination, it's all going to turn. The media all of a sudden is going to turn on Trump. And then we're going to see what the real campaign is going to be about.
DeSantis isn't show business, as they said on Secession. Was that the quote? He's show business? He's box office? Box office. He's not box. Yeah, DeSantis isn't box office. He's somebody who actually can execute running.
Right. But also that's why he'd be a good move for Republicans, I think, is because he doesn't give the Democrats as much to work with.
Yeah. All right, let's
Trump's entertaining, but he gives his enemies so much to work with.
All right, another question from the back. Go ahead, stand up. Tell us your name.
Yeah, Sal Daher from Boston. And the question is much less exciting. Regarding the problem of bank runs and bank insurance by the Fed and bailing out, average people bailing out wealthy people. I've heard a lot of solutions about this. I've been careers in banking for a while. The idea of having senior management and the board have direct liability if the feds have to step in to rescue the bank. Do you think that could be a step in the right direction in preventing banks from taking risks they really shouldn't have taken? I mean, the 2008 disaster, the subprime crisis, could have been addressed with this. I think this crisis with SVB could have been addressed with management just having a lot more to lose.
Okay, so let me just first take issue with the terminology of bailout. I know that's what everyone calls it. A bailout, in my mind, is when the shareholders or the bondholders of the bank get bailed out by taxpayers. That happened in 2008. It did not happen here. Here, the question was whether depositors get made whole or not. I personally don't consider that a bailout. I understand that there are people who do, but it is a slightly different issue. As to the bank management, you're talking about like a strict liability standard here that, basically you're talking about piercing the corporate veil and making the bank executives and their directors liable for mismanagement of the bank. And that's
a pretty high bar.
That's a really high bar. And the problem with it is that I would never serve on the board of a bank. I mean, I probably wouldn't anyway. But if you told me that I could be liable,
piercing the veil is
for
really
that, even
dangerous.
Though, right. We have a thing called the business judgment rule, in Delaware, where if directors and officers of the company perform their job in a good faith way, making the best decisions they can, and it goes wrong, they're not typically liable for that. Maybe the corporation's liable, but they're not personally liable.
Yeah. Look, if you did that, the managers wouldn't invest the cash in anything because they wouldn't want to take any risk of loss. And in order to operate the business, which has a bunch of people working there and a bunch of banks that they got to operate, they're going to charge you a fee to hold your money for you. And so what happens is interest rates turn negative, and you basically have to pay someone to hold your money for you. And that's what's a little bit messed up about the way the banking system works today, is you're effectively giving a money manager the right to invest your money for you. They take your money, they pay you a low interest rate, and they go invest it in high interest rate stuff by taking on risk with your capital. And ultimately, they can take losses on that. And if you wanted to make them liable for those losses, they're not going to take that risk. And the bank is going to have to change its business model from being an arbitrage business to being a service fee business. And they're going to have to figure out other ways to charge you service fees, including charging you to hold your money in order to make money. And that's what a lot of the banks are now doing. First Republic and others have now proclaimed that they're going to start charging a lot more service fees to hold your money, and they're going to start taking a lot less risk. So we're already headed in that direction. But that's fundamentally what I think would be the
Let's take
net
another
result.
question from the audience.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Song Sutton, Las Vegas, Nevada, GP in the Veteran Fund. As investors, you all invest in entrepreneurs. Theoretically, you support American entrepreneurship. What role, if any, do you think VCs should have in shaping, advocating, supporting conservative economic policy in the country?
Chamath?
Zero. I think that you have to know the role that you're doing if you're a venture investor.
which is you're buying a deep out of the money option. And I think that you want to motivate the people that you are partnering with to take really thoughtful but outsized risks. And so I don't think there's a lot of room for conservatism. I do think that there's room for misallocation of capital. And I think that there's people that can help guide that. But the reality is that when you start a company, it's 95% likely to fail. And the venture investor is signing up for a 70 or 80% probability that they lose capital, maybe a 10 or 15 or 20% chance that they get their money back, and then this small 5% chance that it becomes reasonable. So in that lens, I don't think that's where conservative economic policies really should play a role. I think you just kind of got to go for it. And if it's going to win, it's going to win big. And if it doesn't, you lose one extra money. I think like where you want conservative economic and rational thinking is when you go to the extreme other end, which is just like the large scale decisions that affect the economic vibrancy of the country in which you live. And there on the margins, you probably want to be more rational than irrational. But as a venture investor, I think you want to be irrational. But I also think you have to be very judgmental. And the reality is that most companies aren't going to work. And most people, this may seem controversial, most people actually, when push comes to shove, are a little afraid of the decisions they need to make to be truly successful. They're not willing to fire the people that they need to fire. They're not willing to be extreme in the product they want to build. They're not willing to price it. They're not willing to go to market in an extreme way. And it tends to be that these companies fail because of that.
A lack of courage, a lack of conviction.
I don't want to say it's a lack of courage or conviction because that's a very heightened word. I just think that when push comes to shove, most people implode with the pressure of making a very, very hard decision.
Interesting. All right.
In my experience, it could be yours could be
No,
different.
I mean, I agree with you largely. When a startup does fail, if the experienced people around it are watching and can't get through to the founder or the founding team, it's typically they are blocking their own success. They're unwilling to fire their co-founder, their CTO, as the example you're alluding to, perhaps, or raise the price of the software and lose some customers, or to drive people to work harder because you've got a competitor in the space. And that's why you see extreme people win in our pursuit. And I think there's been just a great fallacy that's gone on that you can have live-work balance or life-work balance, and you could have this nirvana where you have it all. The fact is the great companies are made by people who make great sacrifices, period, full stop. And if you're not willing to make the great sacrifice, you're not going to have great outcomes.
Hi, David Samuel. Earlier today, Jason, you had kind of a doomsdayer AI panelist. And my question is, you guys have been thrust into the public spotlight, and we look at deep fakes in the next year or two. As you talk about, tweeting on Friday versus Wednesday, how do you think about somebody having each of you saying things that you did not say? And like, how might we know whether Chamath said that or it was a deep fake saying it?
I already have that problem.
Yeah.
No, but
There was
it
an
will be
article
so
in
good.
Business Insider last week where somebody was saying I had a phone call I never had.
So how do we solve this, especially for you as public
Two
folks?
things. One, I don't think people can say more outlandish and damaging things in AI than we say ourselves on this podcast at times. But number two, as we've discussed many times on this podcast, we have rebooted our trust in institutions, what we read, what we see. And I think people are now assuming they're being manipulated, assuming something might be fake news or doctored. And I think it's like people are building up a much higher resiliency to bullshit, lies, manipulation. And if I were to ask 100 people, what is the bias of CNN, New York Times, Fox, MSNBC, NPR? 90 out of 100 Americans could describe it almost exactly. People are not dumb. This is another fallacy I think we have in this country, is that people are dumb and they're going to get suckered. People are kind of figuring it out. And we've seen deep fakes for 5 years, 10 years now. And they're like, Luke Skywalker didn't look really good in The Mandalorian, but there's a kid who redid it, and now Dolly 2 is doing it. I think we're kind of inoculating ourselves to. What do you think, Freeberg? Deep fakes and truth.
When the Gutenberg press was invented, a bunch of fake shit was printed and people believed it. I don't think the current iteration with deep fakes is very different from any form of mass media being used to tell people untruths. I mean,
it's called the Crusades.
What's that?
Called the Crusades.
The Crusades, yeah. No, I mean, but look, I mean,
You're right. You're 100% right.
But I don't want to speak about religion negatively in that way. It is one of many institutions of power that leveraged mass media historically to get people to believe things, to do things, and to ultimately be able to tax people and get them to provide capital and labor in the interest of those who are in power. And the system of deep faking is one of a long string of using the current toolkit to take mass media and follow that same track. So it will be dealt with in the same way that things have been dealt with that have been fake news in the past, which is that there will be an opposing voice and there will be counter arguments and there will be debate and it will be rancorous and it will be noisy and it will be hard to discern and alternatives will emerge and tools that identify deepfakes will emerge and it will be the same ongoing battle and seeking of the truth that humanity has tried to do since the dawn of mass media,
Yesterday's conspiracy theories are like tomorrow's Pulitzer Prizes, I always say. Like if you look at Sinead O'Connor ripping up the Pope's picture on Saturday Night Live
right,
in protest and saying like this is the true enemy, they're molesting children. And then the Boston Globe and the movie Spotlight is about them decades later winning a Pulitzer for uncovering what anybody who's in the room who's Catholic in the 70s and 80s knew or had heard was going on. And so, maybe the time frame is shortening between when we're being lied to and when we figure it out.
I actually think it's interesting and good because it forces us to find ways to find the truth more effectively. And, it kind of, without the antagonism, I think it's, it's absent. What is the truth? You don't force that debate. You don't force that question. And this will start to reveal ways that we can kind of find things that are actual evidentiary things versus things that someone told me with either historically anecdote or innuendo, or I'm a person in power, or I'm an authority, or I'm an expert. And nowadays it's like, I'm a piece of media, you should believe me. Or here, I'm an image of a person. And that's not going to be the case anymore.
Hi, I'm Jeff, a full-time corporate VC and part-time angel. My question's about AI and higher education. And it's actually some covert parenting advice, so you can decide who's that's relevant for. My son just finished his freshman year of college, and I'm questioning what the future is for him in higher education, given all the change that AI is going to have on every career and every profession. And I'm wondering what advice you'd give to your child or someone who's in college right now for what's an area of study that won't be disrupted by AI or an area that AI, you'll get leverage from your education through AI.
I think the reality is that most of the existing jobs that we have in the United States are going to go to lower cost locations that have that tool chain to accelerate their capability. So we're going to have to reinvent the workforce and the things that we do over the next 30 or 40 years to stay relevant. That's probably I think that should just be the operating principle. If you think about it, we used to run great call centers. Okay, those call centers were outsourced to the Philippines and India. But in the next, 5 or 10 years, you'll have this flawless, unaccented English, or even more eerily, perfectly accented English for the zip code of the person that's calling in so that it sounds like they're talking to somebody that's literally their neighbor. That's just makes so much sense, right? So it's all this stuff is going to happen where all these classes of jobs are going to go away. I saw this article where two lawyers used ChatGPT to submit a legal brief. The problem was that it cited cases that didn't exist, and now they're going to be disbarred. So this is serious business, right? You can't do that. That's real legal malfeasance.
So what are your kids studying?
Malpractice.
In college?
If I had to choose something for my kids, I would probably tell them to do something mathematical or biological. The reason I would point them to math is that I think that it's irrefutable. There's this great clip between Ricky Gervais and Stephen Colbert. You guys should go and Google this. But it's a clip where he's on the Colbert Show And Colbert is a deeply devout Catholic, and he's offended by the fact that Ricky Gervais doesn't believe in God. And he asks him, why don't you believe in God? And Ricky Gervais says, look, if we wiped out all the books in the world, in 1,000 years, everything that's scientific and mathematical would be reestablished. But everything that is religious or theoretically not, mythical, if you want to say, would look very, very different. And that's why I don't believe in God. I'm not trying to question that, but it's a way of answering this question, which is I would try to point my children to the body of knowledge that's largely irrefutable, which is biological and mathematical, versus belief-oriented, because I think these tools will change one's beliefs.
I've been thinking about this a lot too. I think teaching them to be entrepreneurial, resilient, worldly, ability to communicate, ability to lead other people in teams, that stuff's not going to go away, communication skill, et cetera. And I'm encouraging everybody who I work with to just use ChatGPT-4 and Bard every day for every single thing that they do. My base thesis right now is that the job freezes, the hiring freezes at all these companies is indefinite. I'm assuming it's indefinite because the amount of work it takes to write a job requisition is more work in some cases than actually automating with AI already the job function. And so I think 20-person companies might, double in size in the next 2 or 3 years, but still have 20 people. This is going to be a big challenge for society. And if that does come to pass, there's just going to be large swaths of people who are not going to be able to get job interviews for anything other than service jobs. We need a lot more plumbers, electricians, waiters, et cetera. Those probably jobs won't go away, especially if we don't let people immigrate. So I am super enthusiastic about that efficiency, but I think it also means you have to be entrepreneurial, because if you can't get a job and you can't get mentored, you better create your own opportunity. You better create your own company. And that's what I'm seeing. That's the game on the field right now. 2 or 3 people who don't have job offers from Uber and Airbnb and Google and Facebook just saying, fuck it, let's start a company because there's nothing else for us to do. And those are highly skilled people right now doing that.
I'll say 2 quick things about this topic. So one is, I think there's a lot of AI fear porn out there right now. And I just think that like all of these doomer scenarios they're not going to play out overnight. I mean, this is going to take a while. Second, if you think about like job elimination, it's going to be some super specialized jobs. So for example, I wouldn't want to be a radiologist right now, but doctors will be fine. So I think if you're thinking about like going into a job category that's super specialized and clearly in the way of AI, then that probably is not a good idea. But most general skills, like you're talking about, and most job categories are going to be fine. There's just going to be some specialities within them that may get dislocated. Like I wouldn't want to be a truck driver either, because of self-driving. But transportation companies are still going to exist. So I think you just want to be careful about super specialization, I think. But building general skills is always really good. That really should be the point of college.
Where would you put lawyers and accountants on that? I'm curious.
They're sufficiently general that I don't think they're going to be eliminated.
But will they be able to do 5 times the amount of work, therefore we won't need as many?
They may be able to get more done, yeah. I would expect them to be able to get more done.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily think that means we'll need less of them. I mean, the old story about lawyers is that there was one lawyer in a town had no business. Second lawyer came to town and they were both more busy than they knew what to do with. So
induced litigation.
Lawyers get 30% more productive. They file 30% more lawsuits, and
we're good.
Yeah.
All right, let's take another question. These are great questions so far.
Hey guys, Rick Spencer. I hope Chamath gets to choose the wine this evening for dinner.
I did not get to choose your wine, so I apologize in advance.
What kind of wine am I drinking here? This is delicious.
This is a 2018 Chateau Conlefant Rousseau.
I love the bestie. Okay, question.
So you've talked recently in episodes about the speed of AI, the adoption, and how the winners are still unknown. That was reinforced in the sessions today. A room full of investors. How are you thinking differently about your investment, your strategic investment decisions and your strategy? Are there opportunities to look at venture investing differently, like venture studios, in the future of AI?
I had this conversation earlier today. I think I started a company in 2006 where we took large data sets and we built predictive models from those data sets. And we use those predictive models to make analytical tools available to a specific vertical, in our case, agriculture, farmers. And the models were both deterministic, meaning there was kind of definitions, algorithmic definitions of physical parameters, and there was like all the statistical inference that you get from large data sets. And it made recommendations for farmers. What a lot of people are calling AI today is fundamentally a predictive model on text, on language. I am making a language predictor that gives you a sentence. And it seems so profound because it is how we all interact with computers and interact with one another. And as a result, it is kind of viewed as this sea change across all of these industries instantaneously. It's this whole new era. But the fact is that, generally speaking, the digitization of things and the amount of data that's being generated on Earth is going up by some order of magnitude every number of months. And our ability to make predictions and build predictive models that are useful to specific vertical segments is improving every sequential cycle that this is happening across every vertical. And it has continued, and it hasn't changed, and it's not any different. So there's, in this area of genomics and bioinformatics, there is an absolute sea change happening in human health, in synthetic biology, in our ability to understand and predict the biological world and make changes and create new drugs, create new systems for producing molecules, for producing things that humans consume. And it is all buoyed by machine learning applied to large data sets in genomics and other metadata associated with human health and biology. And we're seeing the same thing in other areas, whether it's chemistry, material science, industrial application, consumer markets, and so on. The era of what people are now calling AI is an interface layer of language that's really creating transformational opportunities on how these tools, how these systems, how these models can be utilized and provided to all these different verticals. And allows us to rethink business models, to rethink interaction models, and to really change the economics of different businesses and the utility and the productivity of humans, because it is about speech, it is about communication, it is about what we fundamentally do as a species. So I would argue that the general trajectory of machine learning, the general trajectory of data generation and our ability to make predictions, generate value across all these different markets is continuing in the way that it has been continuing for the last 20 years. And it is profound in its own right. And I wouldn't say that there's a massive sea change in that evolution because of large language models. Large language models create another set of opportunities. So I would kind of create a distinction and make sure that the categorization of the investment opportunities in large language models be assessed on its own. And everyone's all over the place, as you guys probably heard today. Foundational models are getting disrupted every other week. They're being decreased in size. Parameters are being reduced. They're being commoditized. You can run these things on M2 chips. Everything is up in the air right now, and it's friggin' nuts. You're going to invest in a company at a $500 million valuation, and 6 weeks later, it's going to be worth zero because someone open sourced the exact same thing that you can now do for 100K. So that's very difficult and very different but there are still like these incredible points of inflection happening across all these other industries with respect to machine learning. And that's where I spend my time.
Chamathi, want to add what you're looking at? I think this is going to be the big question, yeah.
6 or 7 years ago, there was this Google earnings release where they talked about building their own silicon. I've told this story before, but I pinged those guys and I was basically like, I just want to meet the team that built the TPU. Long story short, a year later, I put them in business. And, we've been building silicon for this moment for years. It's been really, really hard. And the reason it's been really, really hard is that NVIDIA is just really, really good. CUDA is very, very complete. And it's just very difficult to justify why one would build, once you have something that you think is profound, through, implement multiple SDKs to like multiple points of silicon just doesn't make any sense. That being said, I still think you need to be at the absolute bottom of the stack and the absolute top of the stack. I think I'm a little too biased for saying the former, which is I'm hoping that there's vendor diversity and silicon diversity because I think it's going to be really important. I don't think we want to have a world where NVIDIA runs away with it. So I think there's investment opportunity there just because I think everybody should want that to happen. And then at the absolute top, Freeberg's right that all these foundational models, I think, are changing so rapidly that the thing that you want to figure out is like, what are you seeding it with to drive learning that's unique? And that's a data problem. So there's an example that I've given. This was an example given to me by Nikesh Arora. So I'm not going to take credit for it. He's the CEO of Palo Alto Networks, but he was telling me, when you look at travel, the travel space, all the public travel companies are like $300 billion of public market cap. Expedia, Travelocity, all these companies. But they're pure middlemen. And they sit on top of a data feed that comes from a handful of companies. One of them is Sabre. And so I went and I looked at Sabre. Sabre is like a $1.3 billion company, a small little company. But they are the ones that go into all the airlines, extract all this gobbledygook data, normalize it, and allow Expedia, Travelocity, Booking.com to exist. In a world of machine learning and AI where theoretically you can have conversational languages inside of WhatsApp or Messenger or Instagram, you see this beautiful picture, you're like, book me a ticket to that place. Well, Sabre is actually the key value creator there. And all these Expedia examples that are plugins to GPT make no sense. They make no economic sense. Those companies should go to zero. So I've used that as a forcing function for me to try to prove that there's really these two barbells. It's a barbell, bookends. One is a silicon and one of these sort of like data providers. That's probably an investable thing that's defensible. Everything in the middle, I think what Friedberg said is true, which is today it looks like it's worth a couple $2 billion, tomorrow's worth nothing. And so I think you have to be very careful.
If you listen to, there's an interview that Stephen Wolfram did with Lex Friedman. If you guys listened to it a few weeks ago?
I had him on my pod a couple weeks ago, but haven't heard the
Wolfram?
Yeah, he's incredible. Yeah.
He's incredible. If you listen to that interview, I think Wolfram does a great job of describing the difference between inferential models or statistical models and computational models. Statistical models are where you take large data sets and you build statistical models that infer and predict things in the future or predict things that you ask it to predict from the data set that it's trained on. And then it creates a statistical representation. It has a probability of being right or wrong in every prediction it makes. And it creates a distribution of outputs from the model. And you can train a model from nothing today using a bunch of tools that are open source and generally available and a bunch of great silicon and all this amazing stuff that's now out in the world. But there's a bunch of things that you can't generate data and you can't necessarily train models on. And that requires computational models. Models where you actually have to build some system that creates a deterministic outcome. And deterministic means that it doesn't have a distribution of things that could happen. It has one thing. And it calculates it. Like 2 + 4 is 6. There isn't a probability distribution on it being 6. 2 + 4 is computable. It is calculable. It is 6. The great unlock that I think is ahead of us still, generally speaking, with respect to large language models, is the connection back to computational models, is the connection back to structured data, where you can make requests and integrate structured data into the output, combined with inferential output, and computational models, where you can take the inference, you can take the request, and figure out what computational models can I now run, in addition to making a prediction about an output. And that's where so much of the value is going to lie. And it's going to require incredible software engineering talent, applied math, statistics, all the stuff that's made data science, generally speaking, so successful over the last 2 decades is going to continue. And it's going to be this integration between computation and inference. And it's going to be applied in lots of different markets. And it's going to be really powerful. And we're all going to have our minds blown.
Just in terms of like the seed stage or super early pre-seed stage, 2 or 3 people who are obsessed with this technology, who are playing with it every day, who are keeping up to speed on it, and who understand some customer base, whether it's delighting themselves or delighting some other customer base. I'm willing to take that small bet on, that 100K to 250K bet. Because in the previous paradigm shifts or platform shifts, cloud computing, apps, and before that desktop computing and the web, you saw people start tinkering with stuff, and whatever their first 2 ideas were are long forgotten because they figured something else out. And I kind of feel like that's the stage we're in. There were a lot of people who were playing with iPhones in the App Store, and they made a calculator or a flashlight that got built into the operating system, as I think Friedberg is specifically pointing out. Like you could just be part of the model and your whole business is wiped out. We have one company that's trying to make itineraries for travel. And I looked at what they're building, and then, they're figuring out prompts, they're figuring out the interface, they're figuring out what people want. And I did the same searches on ChatGPT-4, and I was like, it's not that much better, what you're doing, but it's better, and your ideas are better. And so I think that they'll win the race, and they only have to please, whatever number of users. And this company could wind up being, like I said before, a 20-person company that does $50 million in revenue. And I think that's going to be a very interesting future. And it reminds me of the app economy. There were a small number of apps, things like DistroKid or Instagram, where small teams built things that printed money and had incredibly high margins. So I think that's part of the opportunity here. I do agree with Chamath's point. Data's the new oil. Whatever data set you have that's unique is incredibly powerful in terms of defensibility and could help you to outpace one of the generic models.
This dude's been waiting.
Okay, dude, who's been waiting?
All right, thanks.
Lightning round.
Thanks, David, for the mic. My name is Raed Masri with Transform VC in San Francisco. My question is for you, Chamath. In the last...
Finally, Jesus Christ. What the fuck, these guys? I mean,
So on the last 1 or 2 episodes, I can recall, you brought up this whole idea as how do we get non-US born American patriots to run for president? So as the growth hacking drunken master, what do you recommend? How do we propel this idea? How do we have it pick up steam and not have to wait 25 years or whatever, we have to wait?
It can't happen in the next few years. I do think there's a small probability it could happen in 25 to 30 years, but like the problem is that the people that
only JCal can be president on the stage, by the way.
The three of us
That's
are
how
foreign
fucked
born.
up this is. But I'll put you guys in my cabinet. You've all got positions.
I think the how is that you have enough bottoms up citizen journalism and opinion formation that people can independently decide that on the margin, this is a good idea. Like, look, I'm not interested in running for government, but if David were in charge of something very important, Treasury or state, I would have immense confidence. If Freeberg were in charge of something, I would have immense confidence. So the idea that guys like this, and
oh, because I'm born here, so you don't have to say that.
Don't worry. You'll get the Department of Sanitation work.
I'm definitely going to win.
No, so
for sure I'm going to win.
Perfect job, Postmaster General.
I do think it's a little crazy that guys like these two get disqualified just because they emigrated when they were like 4 and 6. That's insane. So I think that if we're in the business of actually deciding that you want the best people for this country on the court so that we keep winning championships, you don't tell Giannis, oh, you were born in Greece, so ciao, ciao, you don't get to play. That's crazy. Put him on the court and let him win. So I do think it takes 25 or 30 years, though, of us saying this, because it has to be a groundswell of people that say, I just want to win because I'm seeing all these other countries starting to win more, and I don't think I want that for my children. I do think it takes a generation. I don't think it happens today.
All right, guys. In a couple of hours, it will be the Sultan of Science's birthday.
And Alan Keating's.
And
Keating, that's right.
Alan
Keating's
birthday. So I thought it would only be fitting if 100 all-in super fans took a moment.
I'm going to sing in Italian.
And sung happy birthday to Dave Freeberg. 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Freeberg. Happy birthday to you. And many more. All right, Sultan of Science. I know your wish was to be a top 10 podcaster. It's come true finally.
I'm like, I got to go into podcasting.
Yes. Whoa! One big round. Amazing. Thank you, Ashley.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sack.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, West. The Queen of Quinoa.
Let your winners ride.
pressure room. We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow. Wet your beak. Wet your beak.
Your feet. What?
We need to get merch.
I'm going all in.